Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. And I'm Di Eley, and I'm the Director of MD Research here at UQ Medical School. And today we're going to talk about, basically focus on what your research options are in the UQ Medical Program. I'd like to first start out by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land in which we meet today. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, and we recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. And I'd also like to acknowledge UQ's commitment to diversity and inclusion, which values and respects all members of our broad community here at UQ. So, the Faculty of Medicine is pretty big. We've got, you can look at these numbers here, more than 1,300 undergraduate students, postgraduate students in the over 2,000, lots of researchers, and also 4,000 academic title holders, which is pretty mind-blowing. Academic title holders, they contribute, they're clinicians, basically clinicians or researchers that contribute to teaching. And of course, there's 800 teaching focused academics who are, that's what they do. All they do is teach in the medical program. Lots of research students, and you're going to hear from a couple of those today. And then lots of research money too. So it's why we got to be a very research intensive university. So, you know, you're well placed for diversity and support and research here at UQ. And so we talk about in medical research, the translation pipeline, and that's all about linking preclinical and clinical research into problems with population and global health, because that's where we're focused. Everybody, we all live together in a global society, and we all share a lot of the same health problems. So our programs, which I'll talk about in a second, are in biomedical sciences, medicine, and in public health. And by this, we use basic scientific discovery. So that's lab work, basic science. And that can translate into clinical research to try and answer clinical questions to healing people. And then that's translated further into practice and building evidence-based guidelines. And so that we call this the translation pipeline, because the outcome is to translate those health discoveries to the population. And we've got, as I said earlier, we've got a lot of research strengths across human health and disease here at UQ. So all of this is by no means exhaustive. These are some of the bigger research groups, but by no means all of them. And this is done through 5 hospital-based research centers, 3 research intensive schools, and then clinical research that happens across all of the hospitals. So in a bit more detail, this particular picture here is called the Translation Research Institute. It is a magnificent building, and as a first-year student, you'll spend quite a lot of time here. In and out, but also as a base. So the hospital-based research centers we've got a Center for Clinical Research, Health Services Research, Child Health Research Center in itself, the Fraser Institute, which is housed in this building, and also the Mata Research Institute. So, it's spread across Greater Brisbane, all of this. So there's a lot of, we kind of take the whole footprint of Brisbane, and there's research available there. And then there's 5 schools that you'll be studying in, and that's School of Biomedical Sciences, Public Health, and the Greater Brisbane School, as I mentioned, that encompasses, it encompasses all the other schools actually, but you will be based at one of the clinical schools in Greater Brisbane, as we call it, and that'll be based around a hospital. And then there's a rural clinical school, and I say school, but there's several of them now. We're branching out. We've got 4 different regional areas where you can study at. If you're interested in anything really, from community health to rural and remote health. And that's a very big issue here in Australia, as it is, I know, in Canada and the United States. So we have a lot in common with you both in terms of rural healthcare. And then there's the Ochsner Clinical School, which is based in New Orleans. And we've got a couple of Ochsner students here today, which can tell you a little bit about. It's rather a unique program, as you will know, as I think some of you are considering that pathway. So the research opportunities are quite a lot, I think, for medical students in comparison to other schools in Australia and New Zealand. There's a lot of opportunities across your 4-year degree. UQ and Ochsner Health System is in particular have a long tradition of academic excellence and scientific discovery, which is one of the reasons for the partnership that it represents. And we encourage all students to participate in research. So I'm just going to go through some of the major options. We have a clinician scientist track. Now that is an MD PhD, which many of you will be familiar with in the United States and Canada, where you intercalate your MD degree with a PhD. We also have the same for Master Science. We call it an MD MPhil. In Australia, we call a Master Science an MPhil, Master Philosophy. And we have an MD PhD student today to say a few words as well. And then there's research opportunities for you throughout the 4-year degree. So there's independent self-guided projects. So those are things that you can get started on toward the end of your first year. Then there's summer research that's, you don't get a lot of time off, but you do get some time off in summer. And so you can use that time. There's projects that are set up for a longer term, more intense time frame. And then there's scholarly projects, which will be part of your, actually part of your curriculum. And by scholarly, we don't necessarily mean research, but you're still researching something. So it could be quality improvement, which is immensely helpful nowadays for all our systems, which are getting more complicated in the health services everywhere. So there's some very useful things you can do without doing what's traditionally known as research, but still answering a question and creating new knowledge. And I must plug too that we have an annual student research conference. It's usually in October or September, and everyone, all 4 years, are invited to submit an abstract and also present and also attend. It's a really good, it's a really fun actually time, and it's a good way to see what other students are doing. And then there's curricular and coursework options that will, are actually timetabled for you. And there's research electives that you can actually have time dedicated across the year. This happens in year 2 primarily, to year 2 and year 4, where you have protected time to do a project there, along with some of the research sort of activities or projects that are integrated with your learning throughout the first and second year primarily. So we actually have a new MD curriculum that started this year. Some of you may have heard of that. And in week 1, we start from week 1. We have our research programs introduced. And we reiterate a little bit of what I just said, is which research is integrated throughout your first year. And then after mid-year, across, just so you get sort of settled into the MD. So the second half of your first year, you can start looking for projects and getting, deciding on what you might want to do, so that you can start it at the end of your first year. And then you can continue doing that. There are some requirements, but you can continue doing that from your second to 4th year in the MD. And you can even do this also at Ochsner, if you're an Ochsner perspective. So, the overarching principle of this sort of model is to get clinical application and scientific evidence, integrated as you learn, your in the medical sciences and public health and all that. but the focus is really on biomedical research and the way it interacts with your clinical practice. So, you know, it's been said many times, and I believe it's true, that, you know, developing these skills and getting this research understanding helps you be a better clinician. You know, I think encourages more MDs to become clinician researchers. And so this is the student research portal. I'm always going on about the student research portal, but this is the place where anything to do with medical student research will be found. I mean, you know, this is all the opportunities as well as coursework things, and, you know, and advertising, you know, opportunities like scholarships and things like that. So it's really about connecting students with supervisors and their research. So have a look at this and maybe bookmark that page so you can have a look at it and browse through what it's got. So I'd like to this is the home page here, and I'd like to call attention especially to the medical clinician scientist track. So this is all the information about an MD PhD. If you're interested in that, you need to go to that tile. And then we have a specific Ochsner Student Research Hub, because the way the model is for the Ochsner cohort, as you may know, is your first 2 years are in Brisbane and your second 2 years are in New Orleans. So this allows you to get a feel for what you can do both here in Brisbane and then get ready to do research when you reach New Orleans for your third and fourth year. And I won't go into much, but I've got another page here. So the rest of the home page has all sorts of information. Here's a report on, well, this is the prospective conference for this year. There's research events, medical student research achievements. You can look at some students that, you know, this is self-report, but a lot of our students are doing amazing things in research. And, you know, we've got lists of publications that they report. And, you know, we really like to be able to celebrate your achievements. So, you know, we don't want what you do to be unnoticed. Also things like scholarship opportunities. And then also you can click this, I don't have it open now, but you can see our clinician scientists students. So there's a list of them there and what they're doing. So have a look at that when you look at the portal. And just a quick word about the for Ochsner students who are thinking of this. There is an MD PhD scholarship. So if you're interested in combining the PhD with your medical degree, you need to look into this. There are some eligibility requirements, but it's available on the portal in that Ochsner hub the tile that I showed you there. Or you can also look at the Ochsner MD program website. And if you want, have a look at that. And if you want any information, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. Happy to talk to you about it. And so, yeah, I'm just going to end with this slide here, which just gives just a snapshot of some of the things that we really encourage our students to be involved in. There's a lot of things happening, and I know it's hard to keep up on them, but, you know, do get involved. And we have some very, very high quality research symposia, research weeks, research day here, both in Brisbane and then also in Ochsner. So I think that's me done. Thank you very much. And these are my details. Yes, hope you enjoy the rest of this presentation, and don't hesitate to get in touch with me if you want to ask a question.
Great, thank you, Professor Di Eley.
Yeah.
I did put a link in the chat to the portal, so if anyone wants to have a look at it, you can click on that link.
Thanks, Brian.
So we might hand over to Kylie. Kylie, can you take it away, please?
Sure, thanks, Brian. I'm Kylie. I'm an MD PhD student, and I'm in my second year of the PhD. So the way the MD PhD program works at UQ is that you do your first 2 years of medicine, and then you take some time out to do your research project, which takes about 3 years. So at the end of the 3 years of research, then I will go back to the MD program to finish years 3 and 4. And I'm actually an Ochsner student as well, so I'll go back to New Orleans in years 3 and 4. So my journey to medicine was a little bit lengthy. I came to medicine a little bit late in my 20s, but what I did to get here is I did a bachelor's of engineering, And then I had a master's of science, took about 5 years off to work, and then decided that I wanted to go into medicine. And I actually married an Australian, so this program was kind of perfect for me to kind of see the Australian side of the medical system, and then I'll go back and see the American side. So I get a little bit of the best of both worlds, I think. But UQ is a really great school. I've really had a good time in Brisbane. I think if you're interested and you have a lot of curiosity and a sense of adventure, it's a really good program for you. And as far as research goes, I think I've always been interested in research. My mom says that I was doing some experiments at 6, so I'd have like cups full of whatever just solidified to the windowsill. And I just kind of kept going from there. I did some research in undergrad and then in my master's. And then when I got to medical school, I was like, oh, let's make this 4-year degree 7 years. So here I am. And my research project, we're looking at biomechanical properties of tissues. So we're looking at human tissues, looking at the biomechanical properties, and then trying to design synthetic trainers for surgeons or proceduralists using these properties. And I think that our group demonstrates that there's just a really wide breadth of research at UQ, because my supervisor has projects in trauma, frailty, and then biomechanics. So just our group alone, we've got quite a few projects. And I would also say that the quality of research is really good. And I think that's an important thing to consider. I've tangentially been close to some groups that didn't do very good research, but I think at UQ, there's a focus on doing some really quality research projects. And so if you're interested in research as a medical student, don't discount the PhD program, especially if you're considering Ochsner, because those last 2 years being funded really is huge. If anyone has started to pay back their student loans, 8% is a huge interest rate. So having the last 2 years covered is huge. So if you're interested in research, come with an open mind, be curious, want to learn. Pretty much everyone that I've worked with in research is very friendly. I have, I think, maybe 4 medical students who are working with me, either through the Medi class or just some extracurriculars. So I'm always happy to take people on. And then lastly, I guess, how do I plan to use research in my career? Hopefully to be a clinician scientist. I think it's a delicate balance between entering a training program and being able to do some research, but it sounds like in Australia, there may be some programs being developed where during your intern year or when you're on with a training program, you may have some reserved research time, which I think is huge. So hopefully that wasn't longer than 5 minutes.
That
my
was
spiel.
perfect, but I might keep you on because there's a question in the chat for you already. Just basically asking, when did you start looking into research, and when did you just decide to add the PhD? And I guess a question from me, how do you feel about splitting your MD course?
I'll be honest, it's intimidating because you do go through 2 years of really intense study where you learn a lot. And then you take a step back and you start doing something not completely different, but it is a different workflow. But for me, it was really nice to step back and kind of do a 9 to 5-ish. And then to learn more about different things. And then while you're in the PhD, there are programs to help you, refresh your clinical skills. There's lots of resources just to keep on top of, study and stuff. But as far as looking into research at UQ, I think I started looking for projects probably, second semester of first year, just because my personal opinion was that first semester of entering medical school, you really should focus on being in medical school, learning, how to study, figuring out Brisbane. Because even though I am married to an Australian, it was coming to a new country. So there's a lot of relearning of some things, I think. So I probably second semester. And I think I knew I had always wanted to do the PhD. I found out about MD PhD when I was an undergrad, and I was like, oh, that would be really cool. But I don't think I was really brave enough to try or to think about it seriously until I came to UQ.
Great, thank you very much. Michael, we might go to you now, please.
Yeah, great, thanks. Kylie, that was really interesting to learn about your history. I think we share some aspects that are similar, so that's cool. My journey to medicine, kind of started like many of you. You may have found an interest while you were, younger, had, a significant event that spawned your interest. That kind of happened to me. I went into, undergraduate university at the University of Arkansas in the States, and was planning on going pre-med, and was all gun ho for it and everything. And then I realized all of the work that it required, and I was kind of put off by that at that time in my life, and took a step back. And then that's kind of when I started looking at research. So I also did engineering, like Kylie, and kind of started to follow that path. Looking at research opportunities at Arkansas. I worked in a cardiovascular biomechanics lab, kind of became interested in cardiology and stuff like that. But towards the end of it, I wasn't too interested in research, to be honest. I was maybe not in the best lab. And I think that's something I would stress when you guys start looking for it. You need to find a good fit and a good support group that's going to work with you. But after graduating, the first thing I did was I found a job in engineering, or in research in engineering, which was not what I wanted, but it's what I found, and it worked out well. And what I found was a better lab and a group that I liked working with a lot more. And it kind of reinvigorated my interest in research, and I started working with the MDs in the clinic, because this was like a translational research institute. So we had a clinic where we ran clinical trials in, and a basic science lab where I worked, and we did a lot of stem culture, tissue processing and stuff like that. But it really kind of showed me how clinicians work with researchers. And at the end of the day, a lot of times it is the clinicians that are leading research in these labs, even though there are PhDs, handling a lot of the technical skills. A lot of the ideas come from clinicians in the clinic. So that kind of brought me back to medicine. And, after 5 years, I decided to apply to medical school. And in that process, I knew I wanted to find a program that had really good research opportunities. And my wife wanted to live abroad. And what we found was UQ was a perfect match for that. We had no ties to Australia like Kylie, but we did have a strong sense of adventure, like her and many of the other UQ students do that come from the States or other international locations. And we really found a great fit here. I've been able to find really great research opportunities here, working with Dr. Eley, and actually with some of Kylie's team as well. So there's a very diverse group of researchers here, and you name it, you can probably find it here at UQ. That's the biggest thing I would stress. So if there's something that you're interested in, check out that student research portal that Dr. Eley mentioned, but also just type in, what you're interested in with UQ or Auctioner. If there's a project or a team you're interested in, it doesn't necessarily always have to be on that portal. You can reach out to Dr. Eley or some other avenues to try to get into contact with these groups. And more often than not, people are very receptive to finding those opportunities for you. So that's just one of the big things I would stress, that it's not always what's in that portal. So let's see if we're missing any questions. Yeah, so I considered the MD PhD program as well. For me, I had already spent so much time in research. I wasn't quite ready to suspend my timeline to a career that long. So it just didn't work out for me. But to that first person's question, the nice thing about UQ is that you have that time to figure out if you want to start a PhD program in your first 2 years of school. for those in the States or elsewhere, a lot of times, you'll have to apply MD, PhD at the beginning. At UQ, you really have that time to figure that out, which I think is a big plus. So yeah, that's probably it for me. If there are any direct questions, I'm happy to answer them, but.
Great, thank you, Michael. I might ask you about the recent award that you won down at a conference. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as Dr. Eley highlighted, there are a lot of opportunities for research and awards at UQ and around the country. So I was able to apply to the Australia-New Zealand Association for Health Professional Educations, and I won their student award this past July. So that was pretty exciting. Got to meet some really amazing people, and hopefully broaden our research group a little bit with that. So that's cool.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So how we said in Australia, lucky last. Over to Deval, please.
Hey, so my name is Deval. So unlike Kylie and Mike, I didn't really come to med school with a seasoned research background or anything. I did my undergrad at Hopkins in chemistry and public health and did some basic science research like every pre-med student, I feel like. And I kind of just did it because I was like, it was kind of expected. Like it almost seemed like a implicit requirement to apply to med school. And needless to say, I hated it. So I kind of went in and I was like, okay, I did it. I'm done with it. And came to medical school. I did some graduate coursework in public health at UQ before starting medicine. And then during first semester, me and Mike were actually in the same CBL. And obviously Mike's a seasoned researcher, and we would always somehow some of our conversations would turn towards research. And in general, those conversations, I'd be like, whatever, research, he likes it. I don't need to do it. But then we would always talk about the differences we saw in the education system here and just in general amongst our classmates, right? Our CBL group was very diverse. Obviously, there's a lot of Australians in there. Me and Mike were both Oshner. We also had a couple of Canadian and international students in there. And we started noticing these differences and we kept talking about it. And we're we wonder how this experience, how this diverse experience really impacts how people go through medical school. And we came up with a research idea and we didn't really know what to do with it. And we reached out to Dr. Eley. And Dr. Eley was surprisingly the most supportive person ever, because I was very intimidated by her originally, but then she was very supportive and she kept prodding us to keep moving forward with it. And we kind of ended up I think over the last year, we've kind of created a lot of sub projects and we've just been expanding and looking at well-being amongst medical students. And before I knew it, I was kind of addicted to research. It was a completely different experience. I was not doing basic science research where I was spending 6 hours in the lab every day running columns or gels or stuff like that. But instead, we were looking at these very pertinent questions that were really interesting and applicable to us. So yeah, it was kind of unexpected. I went into medicine not thinking that I didn't want to do research at all, and I fell into love with med ed research. And I think the biggest thing I got out of that was it honestly, as they said before, it matters what group you're a part of, but I think it also matters the people you're surrounded by, right? I think at UQ, what I found is there's a lot of students and a lot of students have these brilliant ideas and they're willing to pursue it. And they're really supportive where they'll help you pursue your ideas and you can help them pursue yours. And I think that support really helps helps you propel forward with any ideas you have or anything you want to do in general, not just research. I think there's a bunch of student groups here that foster interest in certain fields. And I think in general, that supportive environment is kind of what made me like research, even though I didn't like it coming into medicine. But yeah, so we've kind of just been doing med ed research. This past summer, I got involved with some oncology research for the Center for Health Sciences. And it's been a very good experience. And I think it really enhances the med school experience in general. And the reason for that is during the first year of medical school, the dean of medicine said that medical knowledge doubles every 72 days. And just because it's doubling doesn't mean you're going to know everything. But as physicians, we're going to need to know like what the most like up to date like techniques and like protocols for treating certain conditions are. And a lot of that will involve you understanding what research is. So even if you don't conduct research, like you don't create your own project, it's still important for you to understand what research is. And I think as Dr. Eley was talking about, UQ has a lot of like built-in time for you to like create your own projects, but also just understand the research process. Because I think a lot of people like they assume that, oh, you have to come into medicine knowing what research is. But I think UQ kind of takes a stance where they really teach you from the ground up so they can really build you up to that point where you become a competent researcher. But yeah, that's kind of everything for me. But yeah.
Great, thank you very much. We do have a question, Professor Eley, it might be for you. Can you do the 3 years of the PhD program in New Orleans?
That you can do some of it. Yes, that's possible. We've had a student, a couple students do part of their research in other states here in Australia. And we've also had a couple students who did their nearly all of their research block. So that's 3 years back in the States. It was a bit fortuitous because it was around COVID. So they kind of got stuck. But in fact, they were able to continue. But that is possible. You do need to let the graduate school know where you are in things like that. But yeah, that's possible because it's very practical for if you're an Osher student or even if you're a Canadian student, it might be appropriate for you to go back to your home area. Maybe you, as you know, as Mike said, that maybe you've already worked with somebody there. And you've got a chance to continue some research. So it'd be ideal for you to do your PhD back there. You'd probably have to come back to UQ at some point before you actually move, well, to finish your third and fourth year for Canadian students. But even for Austrian students, you probably have to come back to Australia just to touch base in some ways or to report on your progress. And then go back to New Orleans to finish the third and fourth year there. So it depends on what type of student you are.
Great, thank you.
Short answer is yes.
Kylie, did you want to add anything there? And then I think there is a bit of a question in the chat for you about applying for the MD, PhD, MD, MPhil.
I don't think I have anything to add to that, just that I've also heard of people who have done part of their research in New Orleans. My project is based in Brisbane. My husband's Australian, so it's just convenient for me at the moment. But I think like it's pretty easy to like, add a project to UQ, if that makes sense. I think Di mentioned, maybe you had someone that you did research with prior. So like it's easy to integrate. Well, it's relatively easy to integrate that.
I think the bottom line is we want you to do the best research you can. And so if that's in another state here in Australia or overseas, it's actually could be encouraged because it's increasing your collaborations and also helps UQ because you don't do research on your own. The more collaborate, it becomes more and more collaborative as it gets better, actually. So, it's a team sport, as they say.
Thank you. Di, we've got a question about the MD PhD scholarship. Can you talk a little bit more about that? You did touch on it in your presentation. So the question is whether it's the 7 years is fully paid. So
there's I'm assuming you're talking about, I'd have to clarify if you're talking about, is it the MD, the Oshner MD? This is the MD PhD scholarship. Is that how you read it, Brian?
I'm not sure if it's the UQ one or the Oshner one. So maybe if the person can clarify that in the chat.
Yeah,
the Oshner one.
All right, so the Oshner. So I just wanted to clarify that because the MD PhD whether it's Ochsner or wherever you're from, if you do a PhD, MD PhD here at UQ, that's always the same. You get, if you have to get a scholarship. So it's like anywhere else, you have to be eligible to get a scholarship, and it's a competitive process. So that's where it's good for you to talk to me as early as possible to say, I might be interested in this, and then we can look at what your background is and whether or not you're even, eligible, because there are some eligibility basically based on experience. You have to be eligible to do the PhD. If you're successful with the PhD, which I generally wouldn't approve somebody to apply unless we're pretty sure you're going to get it. But they are competitive. So there is that little tension before you get, they actually get the scholarship. So if you get a PhD, MD PhD scholarship as an international student, you will get your MD or you will get your PhD tuition paid. There's tuition for it. And then you will also get a living stipend. So the living stipend is indexed, so it's quite generous. Never enough, but it's on par with other schools. You get that for 3.5, and then 3.5 years. And you can also apply for a little bit more. They've just made it. There has to be reasons, but you could probably get another half year. So you could get a living stipend for between 3.5 to 4 years, and that's to finish your PhD in. Now that is wedged in between your medical degree. So as Kylie said, you finish your first 2 years, and then you get 3 years full time to do your research. But that's a big ask, doing it in 3 years. So you do have another half a year so you're still funded for another half a year. So what you do with that is you're kind of working part-time on it, or you interrupt here and there to do bits, but there's no strict rule that you finish both degrees when you graduate, but ideally you should, because you want to get rid of it and you want to move on to your intern or your residency. So it's a bit flexible at the end, but that's how it works. So that's all paid for. If you're an Ochsner student, you can also apply. This is a completely separate application. You can apply to get your MD tuition paid for in your 3rd and 4th years. So this is rather new, and it's only for Ochsner students. And again, it's competitive, but apply. They want to give these out. They want to make it easier for you. So that means that's completely separate from the MD PhD I just discussed. It's on top of that, but you do have to apply for it. You do have to be an Ochsner student. So and that's just the MD tuition in 3rd and 4th year. Hope that's clear.
Thank you. Another question for you. Does UQ have any connections with Canadian universities to complete a PhD aspect of the MD PhD route?
Yeah, that's a bit like the previous question. Certainly if you had connections with, we don't have to have, UQ doesn't have to have connections necessarily. I think that's your question. No. And we would, as I said, we'd probably welcome you making that connection in some respect.
Thank you. Michael, I might come to you for this one. So it's for a UQ Ochsner student who starts a project here at UQ. Do you have to stop that project after a year 2 and then pick something up when you're in New Orleans?
Yeah, no, definitely not. I mean, we'll continue our work with Dr. Eley while we move on to our time in New Orleans. Yeah, Deval and I are both 2nd years, so I'd also just like to piggyback off of what Deval said. It's so important when you guys are looking at projects to maybe try to think about like who among your friends once you get here would maybe interested in helping you, because it's really, really helpful to have another student with you to tag team work with. And it also doubles your research production, because while you know, you work on half of one project, he works on half of the other. So it's like, you know, 2 abstract submissions for kind of the price of one in a way, which is really, really helpful. It's also going to keep you guys accountable. So I know that's not related to the question, but I thought I wanted to add that because it's helped us a ton. So as you guys think about projects in your first year, or, you know, what you guys may be interested in, look to those around you and see like what specialty they're interested in. If there's someone that aligns with you, you know, work together because it's only going to help yourself. So, and then again, like Deval said, we kind of came up with our own project, and there was nothing in the research portal about it. So, like I said, you know, go find someone that kind of specializes in that field and bring a project to them. They'll be, you know, more than happy to get you guys on the way to starting it. So. Yeah, and then for Auctioner specifically, there are a ton of opportunities at Auctioner in 3rd and 4th year that are going to be independent from the stuff at UQ. So that'll pick up a lot there. You know, from what I've heard, I'm not in 3rd or 4th year, obviously, in New Orleans, but I think a lot of the Auctioner research production comes in that 3rd and 4th year. But if you can start it in, you know, 2nd year, it's very helpful, I would say, because you have more time right now than you will later.
Great, thank you. Professor Eley, did you have anything to add about the research that is done over at Auctioner?
Well, yeah, a couple things too that Mike, you know, a good point, Mike, about you know, teaming up with with one of your classmates, because one, it kind of it makes it a bit more fun and you can complain to each other and about things, but you know, you also get ideas. I mean, you know, as Michael and Deval have said, they came up with the ideas, and I mean, you know, it wasn't listed anywhere. If you approach any researcher and it's related remotely to what they do, you know, they're very happy for you to bring ideas to them. That's one of the reasons that researchers like to work with medical students. I've been told this several times. You know, you come up with questions and things that they don't think about. And you're seeing problems that they don't see. And both clinicians and students are good at seeing problems because they work with them every day. So I would advise to you know, to keep your mind open. Have a look at things at the portal and things, but if you don't see anything there, but if it's an area that you want to work in, approach one of the researchers that's listed in that area and just talk to them about your interests and what you might do. And in terms of going back to Auctioner, yeah, they're very active back in Auctioner. I would say it's a little bit different. It's much more clinically based. You don't have as wide a variety of research to get involved in. There is some wet lab research that you can do there, but most of it is clinically based. So, but this doesn't have to be, you know, this can be even more qualitative research, but clinically based. So, you know, working with patients or you know, interviewing patients or working on a problem, but it seems to be more clinical focus. So that's kind of exciting, because if you can get some ground, foundation skills here with us in Brisbane, and then you go back and you're much more, conversant with a variety of research that you can do. And again, think up of a problem, answer a question. I mean, research is just about, you know, answering questions and creating knowledge. And it doesn't have to be anything in particular that's helpful there. You know, if it's new knowledge, it's generally going to make a difference and be helpful. But yeah, absolutely. Auctioner, you can plan on doing that. But can I just say, when you get here, to have a look at the Auctioner hub on the portal, because what we're trying to develop there is a better way for year 2, first and second year students in Brisbane to connect with potential researchers when they get back to New Orleans in year 3 and 4. You know, it's slow going, but there's a whole list of projects there just back in Auctioner. But again, if you don't see something that you think, oh, I don't want that, but I'm kind of interested in that area, you know, approach that, email that researcher or clinician researcher generally, and, you know, and talk to them. And that way you get back to Auctioner and you're kind of set up to get started. You don't have to start from scratch.
Thank you. Doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat. Professor Eley, I might ask you a bit of a general one. What are the benefits of being a clinician scientist? Why do we want more of them?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of benefits. I mean, it's tough out there. Research is tough. There's, funding is tough for everybody, no matter what you do. But, I think, for example, and I don't want to make this the point, the strong point, but I mean, it really brought to mind, the pandemic really brought to mind the fact that, do we have enough people, clinician researchers to deal with this sudden problem, which is very clinical. I mean, this is, disease, in other words, and then researchers, you need to marry them. You need to have the clinician have the clinician insight, and then how to solve a problem with that research insight. And that's why, Deval was saying too, that, that we try to integrate that, and you have to keep your mind open in terms of, what's a problem here. And then, okay, you've noticed a problem, but what are you going to do about it? Well, you turn it into a question. And then what do you do then? Well, research tells you how to answer questions. And it's all about being curious and asking questions. Research, is the process of research, which is key to learning how to answer questions. So clinician scientists, marrying those two up is why we need more. And I think the pandemic was a good example of sort of alerting us of whether or not we do. So I guess no medical school, or certainly UQ, not every student or clinician can be a clinician scientist, but it's very important for you during your medical degree to understand research and how it can help you be a better clinician. And as Mike said, where do I go to answer this question? I mean, you see something you wonder about, the research process shows you how to search the literature, how to appraise the literature, be critical of it. Don't believe everything you read. And if you don't believe it and you think there's something else you can do, there's your question. You can do some research on it. It's really, making you use helping clinicians use research. That's what a medical school should do. If you want to go farther and be a clinician scientist, wonderful. But, that's not everyone wants to do that, nor would they be able to.
Great, thank you. Well, there's a question in there for Kylie, but she had to drop off and go to another meeting. There's a question about ISAT. So ISAT is an exam that you have to sit when you're in high school to get into to a UQ medicine. So yes, I don't think anyone on this panel would be able to talk to ISAT question, so we'll move on from that one. So there's a question about the typical PhD program.
Yeah, I can comment on that, and Mike, you might be able to comment about timetabling or getting timing for finishing research. Yeah, the question is a typical PhD program is it could be 4 to 6 years. It depends very much. I'm aware of that. Some places, as long as it takes, that's how long it takes. But we have the 3-year full-time block that you're protected and you're supported to do research. And then, as I say, in your 3rd and 4th years, when you're finishing your MD, when you come back to finish your MD, you're allowed to work on that flexibly. That works pretty well for most students, but it is really important that you make good progress in those 3 full-time years. So that's why talking to me as early as possible, finding somebody you want to work with and doing that groundwork stuff, like the lit review and even ethics, so you hit the ground running, seems to be sufficient for students to progress well. Mike, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, my experience comes from the States and looking at PhD programs there, and then MD PhD programs. But typically an MD PhD program in the States would be 7, maybe 8 years. You'll have a 3 to 4 year period for your PhD. And typically that's the same as here. It's between your 2nd and 3rd year, or your preclinical and clinical years. The reason independent PhD programs, maybe 4 to 6 years, is that there are some like curricular requirements at different universities that may be different. And then usually you have to take specific classes. With the MD degree, you're taking those classes in your first and second year, and those are kind of knocking out those requirements for you. That's why, you know, typically in an independent PhD program, your first year or two will be taking like actual classes. You'll have tests and stuff like that. And then you'll start your independent research after that. So I think that's typically why independent project or research PhD programs are 4 to 6, but MDs are only like 3 usually.
Yeah, I just, add to that too. PhDs in Australia follow the more British format where there's no coursework and you're not expected to teach, which is not a good thing, really. It's good to have that experience, but it is a pure research degree. And as I say, it's 3.5 years and it could go up to 4, and that's full-time research. So yeah, it's different than those in especially in the North America where you've got coursework to do and everything. And it's like Mike said, you just do the research. It's still a lot to do, but you're just focused on your research.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions, so we might start wrapping things up. So Michael and Deval, you said earlier that you actually attended this webinar when you were deciding to come to UQ. Reflecting on your time now, do you have any advice for those who are considering the program now? I might start with you, Deval.
Yeah, so honestly, I think at the end of it all, you kind of need to consider like what's a good fit for you. And with UQ, like I just found that it's a very supportive environment. Like even like with research, like I know it can seem intimidating, but like my friends have found research just because you go to class and professors themselves are like, hey, this is the work I'm doing. Let me know if you're interested. And Dr. Eley mentioned how many academic clinicians we have that are teaching us, right? And within the first 2 years, like we're in the hospital and everyone's like really helpful and supportive. And they're like, if you're interested, like come talk to me, because I think everyone here is just really passionate about what they do. And when you find those passionate people, it just kind of clicks for you. At least it clicks for me. So yeah, I think like just consider that. And like in the end of the day, like you're gonna need to find like the research project that you fall in love with if you're really interested in doing research. And I think that's gonna make all the difference. And with how many research opportunities are available at UQ, I think it's kind of easy to do. Like I did not like research and I ended up falling in love with it just because I found the right click. But yeah, Mike.
Great, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, like Deval said, speaking more broadly, I think the education and clinical training at UQ is really top notch. It's way above, a lot of others that I've talked to, even in the States or at other schools in Australia. And you have all the opportunities that you will ever want here. The weather's amazing every single day. Just Brisbane in general, it's a great city. But I think you have to remember with any program in MD, it's challenging, and you have to be an independent learner in a lot of ways, no matter where you go. So I would just stress, you're going to have to work hard when you get here. It's not going to be any different from anywhere else, but you will find a lot of support as you go through it. So.
Great advice. Thank you.
If I could just add one more thing, Brian.
Of course.
As Dr. Eley was saying, and at the end of the day, I think if you reach out early, it opens up a lot of doors. And I think at UQ, like it's so easy to reach out because like we see Dr. Eley at like orientation, like we see everyone right from the get-go. And just like interacting with these people makes it so you can reach out easier. And when you reach out like earlier, like, I think it just opens up more doors, not just for research, but like in terms of like, I've had students that just go in and like work with clinicians because they're like, oh, I'm really interested in the field. So clinicians ask them to come see patients with them. And so like they get this amazing experiences that just might not be available elsewhere because like it's so easy to reach out.
Great, thank you. And she's not that intimidating.
Get me had a good day.
Di, any final words?
Oh, no, I mean, it's great to have Mike Duvall and Kylie sort of, just giving you the lowdown. So, I mean, I won't add anything more, just, really great to see you if you do decide to come this way, and, feel free to get in touch anytime, with questions and that. We want you to want to help you make the right decision for you.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the attendees. Have a good evening or morning, depending on where you are. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.